Hey guys, you're listening to the inaugural edition of Parker's One Man Podcast. However, the name is somewhat deceptive as I'm joined by two others. I've got Zoner over here. Hey guys, I'm Zoner. I'm a shadow, the true self. And over here we have Tim. Yo, what's up? I'm Tim. The facade used to face life's hardships. And I am both the literal host of these two and the host of this very podcast. So, first of all, I just thought we could establish some comfortability with the audience and the listener by just going over our personal history of games, detailing some of our favorite games, favorite systems, and some fond memories we might have with them. So, why don't you start, Tim? Oh yeah, that's easy. My favorite game of all time would easily have to be Super Mario 64. I mean, back then, just the nostalgia associated with that game is just so overwhelming of any other game I've played since then. Back then it was just so nonchalant and my life was carefree. I didn't have to worry about all the honey dips all the time. For those of you who don't know, I'm a total womanizer. That's first and foremost. I'm a gamer second. Recently I have enjoyed some of the BioShock games, the ones helmed by Irrational, and specifically, those are a pretty close second. Like, I've really enjoyed the first BioShock and BioShock Infinite that came out last year. Those ones really struck a chord with me. I thought the stories were just absolutely amazing and really intelligently told, and they were all meshed together with a nice mechanic of the standard first-person shooting, as well as a blend of some kind of almost RPG elements with the plasmids and the vigors. And I just really like going through those worlds and exploring the stories. Those were great. But Super Mario 64 has it beaten in almost every aspect. I mean, the first time I picked up that game, it just blew my mind. The 3D world, even playing on the terrible Nintendo 64 three-pronged controller, everything was just so natural, and the way the world was developed and designed, it was perfect. I mean, I have not played a game since then that I can look back on and say, that game was amazing, that game was perfect. I mean, that game was just wonderful. Not enough can be said about how great I think that world was put together and how excellently designed it was. And that being said, my favorite system of all time would just have to be Nintendo 64 for very similar reasons of nostalgia and just the nonchalance that came at that time in my life, and just being able to play all those great games, like experiencing some of my favorite franchises in 3D for the first time. That'll never happen again, and looking back on that, those are just some of the best days of my life, playing Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, of course, even Star Fox. Star Fox was great. I mean, the Nintendo 64 just had the high quality Nintendo products and titles we've come to expect of them, and that was really a revelatory time for games as a whole, and I just can't get past how great that system was and the offerings Nintendo made for that. Yeah. I mean, I have to agree with that. Zelda's easily my favorite franchise of all time, and Super Mario 64 is an excellent game. So I can see why you think the Nintendo 64 is the best system of all time. It definitely is a great system. What about you, Sonic? Well, I really had to consider this. I had to meditate on it for quite a while, but even then, it came down to a tie, and I just couldn't pick between the two Team Eco games on the PS2. I mean, I'm a big fan of ambiance, first of all, so I think that explains why those are some of my favorite games of all time, but just everything, the atmosphere in those games was excellent, and I love the sense of isolation created in Shadow of the Colossus particularly. I loved exploring the world on the horse, and when you finally encountered one of the Colossi, it was just so invigorating and so relieving almost. I mean, just the pacing in that game was perfect for me, at least. I mean, you'd explore and explore, and you'd finally encounter one of the humongous monolithic bosses battles, and these would take quite a long time, and one was unique, and you'd have to figure out their weak point. And I just think that game in particular was excellent. But Project Eco, excuse me, it also did just as well a job in delivering on that ambiance and that sense of isolation that Shadow of the Colossus did. And it also had that same enigmatic veil cast over it. You didn't really know what was going on throughout the game. You just kind of felt it out. You went with it. And just that type of spontaneity, I just really loved it in both those games. And those games are my favorite of all time. And my favorite system of all time will probably have to be the PlayStation 3. I just think that system, well, first of all, I think you should know I'm a big fan of RPGs, JRPGs in particular, and I think that system, you have to know, RPGs came in droves to that system. There were some wonderful JRPGs, some wonderful Western RPGs on that system as well, but also just the variety and the fidelity of everything on that system, all the games, the genres, and just the visual presentation, the graphics cannot be understated. How powerful that system was at the time, and how it developed too. I mean, looking back last year at The Last of Us, that's one of the best games I've ever played as well. And I just think the way that world is graphically presented is just awe-inspiring. It's awesome. I mean, it's great. And the PS3, you can, looking back at all the reissues, the HD remasters, I could play Eco and Shadow of the Colossus on there. I could play the Devil May Cry series. I could play Metal Gear Solid. I mean, just to name a few, there were so many great reissues and so many great original entries, like the Infamous series and the Uncharted series as well. Sony really stepped it up last generation with their internal development, unlike they had in previous generations, at least in my perception. And I just really think the PS3 had its dividends paid by that effort from Sony to really promote it as not only just a utilitarian system with a Blu-ray player built into the hardware, but also just a great game system. Yeah, I can agree with that, Zoner. I mean, I love my PS3. I played it a lot last generation, and I definitely got my money's worth with it between toggling in and out of Blu-rays and playing the games like Last of Us and the Uncharted series. Those were great, as well as all the great third-party games that came into development last generation, like Assassin's Creed is really one of the first ones that springs to mind, and there were plenty of other ones too that I just can't recollect on right now. But there were some great third-party offerings, as well as some really good to amazing internal projects that Sony put out last generation. So, yeah, that's a good choice. But for me, my family, we've always been on the discount cycle. So, even though I was born in 1995, at which point the N64 was just about to come out, it was coming to fruition. It had been revealed and everything, and everybody was hyped on it. I was stuck with an SNES for a couple years, so I had the opportunity to experience great games on that system, like Super Mario World and A Link to the Past, as well as Yoshi's Island and some of the other F-Zero, some of the other games on that system. I mean, that was a great system. Then moving on to the N64, like Tim said, that system can't be undermined as well. That was also a great system, and it was revolutionary to say the least, with the 3D graphics and the three-pronged controller with the joystick. I mean, that was a revelatory system for me myself. Just in playing Ocarina of Time for the first time, that's what set me on this path today. That's what made me want to talk about video games and play video games for the rest of my life, and that's what has me doing things like this podcast and writing for the blog. But by far, I'm a child of the GameCube. I mean, like Tim said, looking back on just nostalgic value of that system, that's infinite for me. I mean, some of my favorite entries and some of my favorite franchises came on that system. Like Metroid Prime is a wonderful game. Super Mario Sunshine, I think, is underrated, but I think it's just as well put together and well developed as something like Mario 64 or Mario Galaxy. I think that game is extremely underrated, but extremely good. But by far, probably my favorite game of all time would have to be Wind Waker, the Zelda game that came out on the GameCube. And I know it was really controversial at the time for the art style and the cell shading, but that world is just, it feels so organic to explore and sail around, and a lot like you said, Zoner, there was just an palpable sense of ambiance in that game, and I think it was impeccably designed. Exploring the sea felt natural, and it felt expansive. Everything in that game was just huge, and when you encountered an island, it really felt like you discovered something new. And each island had something to do on it, whether it would just be, collect a blue choo-choo jelly or find a piece of heart or a treasure map. Every island had something to do and something unique that really expanded that sense of exploration that I think the Zelda series has really perfected throughout its lifespan. And even on the Great Sea with the treasure hunting and salvaging, I think that also added a lot of depth and increased the sense of exploration even further. You never knew when you were going to encounter a treasure chest and what it might have in it. And even the infamous fetch quest for the shattered remains of the Triforce, I think that was also really imperative to establishing that sense of exploration, that atmosphere that I love about that game. I mean, going through, having to find the treasure charts and having Tinkle decipher them, and then actually going to salvage the Triforce shards, I think that was great, and it really added well, first of all, it lengthened the game considerably, which I didn't mind at all. I thought it was an enjoyable quest and really furthered that sense of exploration that I've touched on so frequently in this little tangent I've gone on about this game. But just looking back on that game, I mean, I think that game is perfect. I can't stress that enough, how wonderful that game is, and how it invariably is my favorite game of all time. And the GameCube is also my favorite system of all time. Just looking at what, like, Metroid Prime, which I alluded to earlier, as well as Super Mario Sunshine, those games were great. But even the Mario spin-offs on that system were great as well. Like, I think Mario Kart Double Dash is great and really eccentric within the development of that series, within the lineage of that series, I should say. Actually, it's unique in the two-player, two karters mechanic, and it's really underrated. I think a lot of the games on the GameCube are underrated just because it sold so poorly, and it unfortunately came out the same generation as the PlayStation 2, which we know sold like hotcakes retrospectively. I mean, it's the greatest selling home console of all time. But for me, those would have to be my favorite games and systems, respectively. But I can agree with you two as well. I mean, the N64 and the PS3 are both excellent systems. Yeah, yeah. I think you really put that well, Parker, and I can understand what you mean by the GameCube and Wind Waker being there for you personally, striking that resonating with you nostalgically. But you can't sway me from the N64. I love that. No, I'm not trying to argue with you or anything. I just thought that was an appropriate opportunity for me to expound on why I love that game so much and why I love the GameCube so much and why I think they are both just drastically undermined. I mean, in the contemporary landscape of the video game industry and video game history as well. I think not enough can be pulled from what Nintendo's development mentality at that point in time. I think they kind of lost that with their subsequent generations and trying to pander to a casual audience. And I think with the Wii U, how it's kind of faltered out of the gate, I think they've really lost the casual audience. First of all, I think they've migrated to the mobile sphere with the iPhones and Flappy Bird and whatnot. And I think Nintendo is going to realize that soon enough, and I think it's early enough in this console generation that we will see Nintendo return to their prime of the N64 and GameCube development days, and I think we're going to see a lot of excellent titles come out for the Wii U in the future. It might not seem that way right now, and I'm sure the lack of third-party titles will continue just because it's comparatively underpowered to the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. But I think it's going to be a great first-party system, and I think next generation Nintendo is going to realize that they can't continue to appease the casual audience, so they're going to have to go full-fledged, and I think they are going to make some considerable strides in catching up with both Microsoft and Sony and their hardware specifications and their horsepower. Yeah, I can see that. I definitely agree that Nintendo is really behind on just overall raw power, and that's not a secret to anybody. But I think there's a lot to be taken away from not only the cinematic approach that most Western and third-party developers that are developing for the Xbox and PlayStation, I think Nintendo can also learn from that, as most of the Nintendo games seem to be really insipid when it comes to story, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think gaming as a medium is advancing so far into the realm of storytelling and narration, and Nintendo just seems adamant to stick by what they've been doing for several decades now in gameplay first and foremost, and that's not bad. I mean, there are some really good games out there that thoughtfully incorporate gameplay and storytelling, just like Tim said over there with the BioShock series. I think that is a perfect example of great balance between gameplay and storytelling. But then there are also games that are just propelled solely by storytelling, like something like Gone Home or Heavy Rain, the more visual novel aspect to it, the exploratory point-and-click adventures. I think there's something to be learned from that too on Nintendo's part of advancing storytelling and using storytelling as a way to further resonate with people and expand your audience. I mean, when Reggie took the stage for E3 2006, 2007, I can't remember what it was, when they were hyping the Wii, his introductory monologue dealt with how most people have watched a movie, read a book, seen a television program, but a lot of people haven't played a game. And Nintendo, with the Wii, they were emphatically successful with expanding that audience, but
that audience has been pared back now. They've migrated to smartphones, and Nintendo isn't going to be able to recapture that. But I think they can recapture that. I think the video game industry as a whole can continue to evolve and expand its demographic just by incorporating these very well thought out, sophisticated stories into their games that appeal to the moviegoer or the bookworm or whatever. I think storytelling is the way that the video game industry as a whole is going to expand its audience. No, definitely. But I think, Zoner, the way that Nintendo approaches their development philosophy with gameplay being the hallmark, the highest concern, and everything else kind of being peripheral. That includes story. I mean, how many times has Princess Peach been kidnapped by Bowser already? I think that's refreshing in the scope of the modern video game industry. Excuse me. In that most of the companies, like you said, are today more geared towards a cinematic movie-like experience. And I mean, that's great and all, but I think you have to be indebted to your roots. You have to acknowledge your heritage, I guess, as an industry. And I think if the industry detaches too far from their history, the basal philosophies of video game development, I don't think it's really video games anymore. It's just interactive media, which essentially is video games, but it's not what I have come to love and enjoy about video games in general, which is just that experience, that interaction you have with the open world of a video game. And Nintendo, I think they just nail it each and every time they introduce a new Zelda game or a new Mario game. I don't think there have ever really been a terrible internally developed Mario or Zelda game, or even Metroid game to that extent. And we know that Retro is doing excellent things with that franchise. I mean, Team Ninja, not so much, but I think Nintendo learned from that. Although you can kind of be skeptical with Hyrule Warriors, but I think that's a topic for another day. Yeah, definitely. So I think we're gonna run out of time here pretty soon. I got 8 minutes left. So let's talk about Mario Kart 8. The Mario Kart 8 news blowout that happened this week. The embargo was lifted, and just a lot of information poured out from all over the internet. IGN in particular, I know they covered a lot. So let's just discuss. What are your impressions of what you've seen so far, what you've read, the new information that has been revealed over the past couple of days? What do you guys think? Well, I love Mario Kart. It's a great game to just sit down with a couple of bros, even if your girlfriend or somebody, your significant other, if they know how to play games. It's a great game. It's a simple game. It's really to the point. It's just a racing game, and it's really fun. But it kind of suffers from, that typical Mario syndrome, in that all the Mario games are relatively the same, and the Mario Kart franchise has been no exception, with barring Double Dash, of course. But even then, it was the same archetype. It was the same template used. They just implemented a new, unique idea on it. But each game, what I'm interested to see most about, and you can't really experience this until you actually get your hands on it and you can tangibly interact with the controller and with the game, is each Mario Kart, they control significantly different to my experience. Like, they're very well nuanced, and to the developer's credit, I like having to pick up new Mario Kart and not instantaneously know how to play. I like having to indoctrinate myself to the way the game plays and the subtleties of the control scheme. And that being said, the new items look great. The piranha plant looks really interesting. I probably won't see it a lot because I'm always in first, so I'll probably just get coins and bananas and whatnot. But the piranha plant looks really interesting, as does the boomerang. I like how they're incorporating new elements from the most recent entrance in the main series, Super Mario. In the main Super Mario series, with the piranha plant from Super Mario World and the boomerang from Super Mario 3D Land, Super Mario 3D World, excuse me. I think that's going to be really fun, and the course designs, the HD graphics, can't be understated how beautiful they are, and the course design just look just as great as ever. I'm really excited for it, and this new news just made me that much more exuberant for its release. Yeah, I like what Tim said. Just the way the game is designed and the control scheme is nuanced. I always look forward to that as well, because each and every Mario Kart you pick up is another challenge. It's not, even though essentially they are very much the same game with prettier graphics or additional items or new tracks. I think they're controlled the way that Nintendo develops it, and the control scheme is very thoughtful at the very least, in that each time you pick up a new Mario game, it's a completely new experience, like he said. But I mean, I think Tim, he touched on everything really. I mean, the game looks great, it's wonderful, and I'm really excited to play it as well. Yeah, it just looks good. It's finally nice to see something like Mario Kart, to see all these Nintendo franchises in HD on the Wii U. And I know we were talking about this earlier, how the Wii U is drastically underpowered compared to its competitors, but it doesn't look that way. I mean, Nintendo has always been great at taking advantage of art style and stylistic direction and working within their limitations and creating the best looking games they can. I mean, looking at something like Mario Galaxy last generation, which was on a system that maxed out at 480p. That game, I went back and played that recently, and it just looks amazing. I mean, even for a Wii game that was essentially running the same hardware that the GameCube ran, which came out in 2000, that was 14 years ago. So that game came out on practically 14-year-old technology, and it still looks amazing, even to this day. It's great. I mean, not so much compared to New Super Mario Bros. U, which the listeners at home are watching right now, or Super Mario 3D World last year, which looked incredible. But Nintendo has always been great with their art direction and everything, and I think the Wii U is kind of getting a bad rep in that it is underpowered, but not as much as people make it out to be. I mean, looking at Mario Kart 8 and Wind Waker HD last year, which was just an HD remake of a GameCube game, those games look absolutely amazing. I mean, probably some of the best games I've ever seen, and personally, and I think it's great that Mario Kart is the next series to be introduced to the HD epoch for Nintendo, and I'm really excited just to get my hands on it and see the visual flair that Nintendo has constructed for the new Mario Kart game. So, moving on, finally, we got one more tidbit of news that came out just recently, and that's next Tuesday. There's going to be a Smash Bros. Specific Direct. And I don't know, there's a lot of speculation going around the internet about whether or not there's going to be a release date or new characters. I mean, we have to at least get some new characters. Even returning characters, I would expect, will be showcased in the Direct. I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't have that with me, but presumably it'll be shorter than the traditional Nintendo Direct, so I'd say probably anywhere between 15-25 minutes. I think that's a good time slot for it. But what do you guys think? What do you think is going to be announced in the direct? Any speculation? Well, I definitely think it's time we get, Ness confirmed, Captain Falcon confirmed. Has he been confirmed? I don't think he has. And Yoshi. I mean, Yoshi just came out with a game, with his new game on 3DS. So I think it's prime time. We got at least those 3 characters confirmed, and I'd also like to see at least one new character introduction, particularly from a series that is kind of underrepresented, or a character that adds some nice variety to it. I can't really think of any right now, but something like even another Fire Emblem character with the success of Fire Emblem Awakening last year. I think I've seen some just some theories around some concepts for a Ice Climbers like duo with Chrom and another character from that game, and I think that would work really well. I think that would be really interesting if you could have dual sword play at once, but we already have a lot of sword users in the game. I just don't know who else we could see, but whoever they turn out, I think Sakurai is really determined to make this game one of the best games yet in the series, especially since it's entering the HD, and I think Nintendo is really, putting a lot of weight on his shoulder with making this the best game in the series, just because the Wii U isn't doing so well, and a lot of the hype has been focused on this game because everybody loves Smash Bros. And I think we're gonna see at least a few new character announcements, and I'm hoping for a release date, and it seems like the best opportunity for Nintendo to announce a release date, just because it is a Smash Bros. Specific Direct, and I don't see why they would announce a Smash Bros. Specific Direct and not give us at least a release window at the very end. A release date would be great, but I mean, I don't know. I can't really trust Nintendo when it comes to something like a Nintendo Direct, just because you never know what you're going to get, even though it is focused on Smash Bros. I don't know. Yeah, I think it definitely is advisable to be skeptical heading into this Direct, just because you don't know what Nintendo is going to bring to the table. But I do expect a release date, and probably a few new character announcements. I don't think we'll see multiple new characters. I think we'll get a new trailer. A new trailer that reintroduces some of the more consistent characters throughout the franchise that have appeared. So like Ness, like you said, Yoshi. I think probably Jigglypuff should. I don't think Jigglypuff has been announced yet, has she? But if she hasn't, I think she'll be announced for return. And I think we might get 1, maybe 2 new character introductions. I don't think this will be on the same scale as E3, where we got, Villager, Mega Man, and Wii Sports Trainer all right then and there, because that was the reveal trailer. I don't think it's going to be on that. I don't think it'll nearly be on that same scale, but I think it'll be worthwhile, just if nothing more, for the release date. Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to add to it, but I think you guys really touched on everything that I think is going to happen. But I just would like to reiterate what both these guys said and take it with a grain of salt. I mean, we don't know what we're going to hear, and don't get your hopes up too high. I mean, I don't think that can be undermined. I don't think that can be overstated, just how unpredictable these Nintendo Directs is, so I'll reiterate that once more. Alright, and with that, running out of time, so it was great chatting with you guys. I'm glad we were all able to express our opinions about just kind of the game industry at large. There wasn't really a specific focus for this podcast, but it was great. It was a great opportunity to introduce everybody, and we'll be back on either Wednesday or Thursday with another edition of Parker's One Man Podcast. Thanks a lot for listening, guys.
Woo!